Hello and welcome back to another episode of Injustice For All MMA. My name is David, and this episode is for UFC Fight Night, Cannonier V Gastelum. First, we start with one thing. Overall, it was a great night of fights. Originally, I was thinking, halfway through, I believe, once we got to the feature prelim, I thought to myself, you know what? Most of these are finishes. And the judges seem to have gotten all the things correct. And right until I got maybe halfway through the main event, that's when I was like, all right, we're back onto the weird scorecards, and some of them are a little funky. But overall, no one got screwed. The right fighter won in every circumstance, either by finish or by decision. But, we have no injustices, which is the biggest part. That's the basis of the whole show. But we have some honorable mentions. And we're going to start off with Roberts versus Bahamondes. That fight ended in a KO, but we have a weird scorecard, which is from David Torelli. A 10-9 in the first round. He gave that to Roberts. Obviously, I gave a 10-9 to Bahamondes, and so did all the other judges. But David Torelli gave a 10-9 to Roberts. And in that very first round, Bahamondes outstruck Roberts, and he dropped him with a leg kick. So I'm thinking to myself, I don't know how you get a 10-9 for Roberts in that case. Guys, at this point, I don't know if I'm just getting bored, or if I sound a little unenthusiastic, or if I can't scream anymore. And, in the earlier episodes, it's like, how the fuck did you do that? And da-da-da. Now it's, I'm just going to read these out. I feel like I'm just going to read some of these. Some of them are really bad to where, not on this fight card, but when it gets more enthusiastic, the worse they are. But this is just another one of those. How do you get that scorecard based off of what you saw? So basically, that's an honorable mention for Dave Torelli. We go on to the second honorable mention. This one isn't actually an honorable mention. It's more of an observational thing. I'm talking about Kelleher versus Pilarte. Obviously, all judges scored a 30-27. I also had a 30-27. I wanted to talk about the first round. The first and the second round were very 10-8 close. They were very 10-8-ish. Obviously, I did not give one because Pilarte was very active from the bottom. In that third also, he was also very active from the bottom. So there was no reason to really give it 10-8. If he wasn't active, there's a bigger chance of a 10-8 for sure, but those are my reasons for not giving a 10-8 for those rounds. So there's that. Now we move on. We move on to another honorable mention, which, when I was, searching for the honorable mention stuff, I wasn't expecting to see this on the honorable mention thing, but it always happens in these weird rounds. There are certain rounds, where you think, where abnormal things happen. So, for example, the Nzechukwu fight versus, his name's blanking on me, but the second Nzechukwu fight, I think that's a good enough reference, where his opponent gets his back, and he's on top of his back for pretty much the majority of the round. And the judge gave a 10-8. And the reason, and my argument for why it wasn't a 10-8 is there was very little action. Like, yeah, he had his back for 5 minutes, but the ground and pound, or the air and pound, because he was in the air, it wasn't on the ground. The air and pound wasn't enough to elicit a 10-8 in my book. So this is one of those rounds where there was no 10-8 involved in this, but it was really all over the place, right? You might see like a weird scorecard, but the obvious right answer is Pantoja 10-9, right? In that first round, in that very first round, you have Pantoja who gets a takedown and controls Royval for about 2+ minutes on the ground, right? No ground and pound. He's just kind of controlling him. Then once they finally get onto their feet, both of them are catching each other. They're pretty even on the amount of strikes on their feet. I mean, objectively speaking, that round goes to Pantoja. There's no argument that that round goes to Royval. Yeah, when they were on the ground, Royval had some shots for him. He threatened a submission, I believe, in that first. But let's not forget, it wasn't cinched in. He threatened a submission, but it wasn't serious. It wasn't a serious submission to where this is like in, or he's fighting off his, or Pantoja was fighting off his leg. Nothing to indicate that round went to him. That went to Royval. So again, I had it 10-9 for Pantoja. Saul D'Amato had it 10-9 for Royval. He was the only judge who had it for him. So there you go. Honorable mention for Saul D'Amato. Then we go on to Jones versus Kakhramonov. Another fight that I didn't think was going to go, that a judge was going to give differently. But when I looked at it, someone gave a round to Jones. I had 2 10-9s in the first two for Kakhramonov. And then when you look to the scorecards, you see something different, right? 2 judges had it the same way, and then Mike Bell gives the second round to Jones. And I'm looking at the sheet. Kakhramonov got outstruck. I'm sorry, he outstruck Jones. And here's where it gets a little fishy, right? At the very end of the round, very close, I would say like a minute. I'm sorry, Kakhramonov is outstriking Jones throughout the entire fight, throughout the entire second round. And about a minute, I would say minute 15, maybe minute 30 left in the round, Jones gets a takedown. And if he were delivering effective ground and pound, he probably steals the round. But he's tired, and so is Kakhramonov, that he's giving very little ground and pound, and a lot of it is missing, and a lot of it isn't as effective enough to give him the round. Therefore, it's not a good argument to give him that round. So honorable mention there for Mike Bell on that one. Then you go to a fight that I thought was pretty easy to score. Porter versus Sherman. I had it 30-27 for Porter. And you then go to the scorecards for the judges, and you have 2 judges who had it 30-27. Then you have Tony Weeks, you have Tony Weeks, who gives a 10-9 to Sherman in the first. Now, I will admit that the first is probably the closest round for Sherman. It is the closest. But here's where you go, no, it's still not his round, though. Yes, Sherman is outstriking Porter in that first round, but it's not enough. This isn't Kakhramonov type outstriking to where, Jones has to do more to win that round, right? Basically, he's outstriking Porter, but once Porter gets that takedown, he does enough to get that round because he wasn't outstriking him by a lot. He was outstriking him barely. He was just up on the count, really, which is why I think Tony Weeks made the wrong decision on that one. So honorable mention there for Tony Weeks. We then go to a fight that I'm probably not going to give an honorable mention to, because even though I think my scorecard is probably the correct scorecard, pat on the back there for me. This was scored by all three judges in a weird way to where I can't effectively. I mean, I could, but I can't because this was the closest fight. This was super close. It was just super close. So I'm gonna try and dissect it and criticize it as well as I can, but I'm going to be a little charitable. So I gave it 29-28 to Madsen. This was a split D, but 29-28. I gave the first and the third to Madsen. Now, all three judges agree with me on the first round. So I think we can all say that Madsen won the first round objectively. It's his round. We then go to the second round, where it's a little different. I gave the second to Guida. I thought Guida did enough. Guida was more active, and he landed the more strikes in that round to give him the second. Now, two judges gave it to Madsen, and then Saul D'Amato, who eventually gave it to Guida, gave him the second. So we're just looking at each other with how do they give him the second. I personally don't know how they give Madsen the second, but okay. We then go to the third, which confuses me the most because in the third, while it is close again, I do believe Madsen outstrikes him. It's close again. All three of these rounds are pretty close. The last two rounds are the closest. The first one is pretty clear. The last two rounds are pretty close. I think Madsen did enough to win that round. Two judges gave it to Guida. At that point, I'm lost and I'm confused. Eric Colon gave it a 30-27. He had the right person winning, but I don't agree with the 30-27. Obviously, Mike Bell had the right person winning, but he gave the second round to Madsen and the third round to Guida. And then Saul D'Amato, I just thought his last two rounds were, his last round was incorrect. I believe his last round was incorrect. So, I'm going to give an honorable mention to nobody. I just wanted to just talk about that round. Talk about that fight, really. And then finally, just to finish this whole thing, before I go to the last honorable mention, I thought halfway through this fight card, I was thinking, man, I was going to come here and just go, we have a clean slate. We have a perfect scorecard for the fight night. And no, we just have a couple blemishes. And then finally, the last thing is Cannonier versus Gastelum. All of them are correct. Now, there's this little tiny blip, though, because during the fourth round, Calvin gets knocked down. But they were saying that he didn't get knocked down. And there was this weird thing where I thought to myself, you know what? If he doesn't get knocked down, Kelvin probably wins that round. Kelvin is much more active. He's landing more shots. And Cannonier, in some of these rounds, he starts off really well. He starts off really well, and then his output just slows down drastically. It slows down so drastically to the point where I think in maybe a couple of these rounds, Kelvin was a little more active. It didn't get dropped in that fourth one. Dropped, in quotations, or dropped. Or in, if he just didn't get dropped, we're looking at maybe he steals a round or two. But overall, I had it 48-47, and my scorecard reflects the judges' scorecards entirely. That's all. This episode was probably longer than it should have been, but hey, it is what it is. Thank you for listening, and God bless.